smells really bad. We almost went down there, but I'm glad we didn't. That would be mushy. Alright, so we are on the other side of the river from where we typically go, because of course we have to go someplace further away. And we're going to one that's got some historical value, and we will explain that at some point before we go find this. But anyway, come along, we're going to go handle a cache that's got some connections to Blackbeard. Doo-doo-doo! So this cache is referred to as Blackbeard's Point. Now, I was familiar with the name Blackbeard. As most of us are, we've heard of the stories, we've seen the movies. But who exactly was Blackbeard? That's a little something we didn't know. Turns out he was born Edward Teach in 1680, and at some point became a crewman of an English privateer during Queen Anne's War. After the war, he fell in with pirates, and he soon became a captain. He armed a captured French merchantman with 40 guns and renamed the ship the Queen Anne's Revenge, which became the nucleus of a small private fleet which harassed the Western Atlantic and Caribbean, often operating out of the sounds of North Carolina. On 5 December 1717, Teach stopped the merchant sloop Margaret off the coast of Crab Island near Anguilla. Her captain, Henry Bostock, and crew remained Teach's prisoner for about 8 hours and were forced to watch as their sloop was ransacked. Bostock, who had been held aboard Queen Anne's Revenge, was returned unarmed to Margaret and was allowed to leave with his crew. Bostock later wrote describing Teach as a tall man with a very black beard which he wore very long. This is the first recorded account of Teach's appearance and is the source for him being known as Blackbeard. Later descriptions mention that his thick black beard was braided into pigtails, sometimes tied with small colored ribbons. Johnson of 1724 described him as such a figure that imagination cannot form an idea of a fury from hell to look more frightful. Whether Johnson's description was entirely truthful or embellished is unclear, but it seems likely that Teach understood the value of appearances. Better to strike fear into the heart of one's enemies than to rely on bluster alone. Teach was tall, with broad shoulders. He wore knee-length boots and dark clothing, topped with a white hat and sometimes a long coat of brightly colored silk or velvet. Johnson also described Teach in times of battle as wearing a sling over his shoulders, with 3 brace of pistols hanging in holsters like bandoliers, and stuck lighted slow matches under his hat, the latter apparently to emphasize the fearsome appearance he wished to present in his enemies. Despite his ferocious reputation, though, there are no verified accounts of his ever having murdered or harmed those whom he held captive. On November 22, 1718, Blackbeard was captured and beheaded by the Royal Navy off Ocracoke Inlet, North Carolina, and his head was famously hung on a ship's bowsprit and displayed there for several months as the Navy vessel journeyed across the Atlantic and back. There are many stories of the ultimate final whereabouts of Blackbeard's head. Some are pretty crazy for sure. Some believe this item, found in one of Ripley's Believe It or Not museums, is the real thing. This photo was taken in 2012 by a museum visitor and posted online, assuming it might be real. But alas, I ran across this item for sale online years ago. It is a creation by artist Barry Anderson of a mummified skull of Blackbeard. It sold to someone in 2010 for $675. And actually, it turns out that artist Barry Anderson worked with Ripley Entertainment for over 17 years as their lead artist and director of the art department. His work can be seen worldwide at Ripley's Believe It or Not museums, Louis Tussauds Waxworks, Ripley's Haunted Attractions, Ripley's Aquariums, and the Great Wolf Lodge. Most historians reported that in February of 1719, Blackbeard's head was stuck on a pole in Hampton, Virginia, and left as a warning during the hanging of convicted pirates. No record of it being later removed or relocated seems to exist, and so it is assumed to have simply deteriorated on the spot. And because of this history and the following cache placement, I was able to learn of the history of this well-known Blackbeard the pirate, whose name I was quite familiar with, but of whose history I was unaware of having taken place in my own backyard. Trying to take a path less trodden to avoid the massive amounts of poison ivy that we saw going the other way. I am not going down there where the mud is. Top is just not quite big enough to cram the trackable I have in there because it's got a big keychain ring on it and it won't fit. So, oh well, we'll drop it somewhere else. So we are here where the history is, and we don't know where that would be though, but Blackbeard's head was here on the waterway to ward off, I guess, anybody that thought to do harm. Interesting. All right, hopefully you enjoyed that little history lesson. We sure did. It's always neat to learn about places in your area where things took place. Now we're in Virginia, obviously the first colonies and stuff were here, so there's a lot of history here, and it's just neat to learn some of the stuff that happened in the past.
And one thing I'd like to say is that a lot of times when you're geocaching, you know, you're just looking for the cache, but nobody really reads the descriptions, and that's where the history is. So
yeah, the people who plant the geocache take some time to write it, so read up on it, learn where you're at.
It's kind of cool. Anyway.
All right, thank you for watching. Later.